Hi, and welcome to The Listening Post. My name's Blake Longhofer. This is my co-host, Lee Brewer. We're just a couple of guys on the internet. One who used to work in politics, one who gets high off of numbers. So naturally, we're going to be doing a podcast about polls and the election. We got an election in a couple of days, and so this is actually our first podcast. If you like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, enjoy. And we're going to get started. So, Lee, you've been checking out the polls that have been coming out a bunch for specifically the Battleground states. We live in one. We're Florida guys, I'm sorry. The meme is true, okay? The meme is true. So, what is Florida man voting?
Well, it depends who you're looking at. So, if you go with the people who have, for the last 4 years, actually way longer than that, but especially for the last 4 years, have been putting out over 90% negative press for Donald Trump, over 60% positive press for Joe Biden. If you go with those folks,
the mainstream media,
Trump doesn't just lose Florida, he basically loses everything. Though, even with those folks, he's now sort of tightened and proved that Trump has improved a little bit there. But if you go with what I would consider, and perhaps you consider more independent pollsters or more direct data sources, he's looking a little better, right? It's looking a lot tighter. When it comes to people, I think Blake and I would probably respect a little more, actually being able to put our hands on their data, looking at their record. It looks like Trump's kind of got Florida, frankly.
Between Rasmussen, Trafalgar, and Barris at the People's Pundit daily, they have Trump doing rather well in Florida. It's still close.
Yes.
Full disclosure, it's anybody's game. We're within a couple of percentage points with most everybody in Florida, so Trump could win Florida. I think he's probably going to. He very well could lose Florida, and if he loses Florida, that's a pretty tough hill to climb, actually. But I think he's going to win. I actually just voted today. We voted early. You voted a couple of days ago. When I was at my voting site, there was we waited about an hour, my wife and I. And in 60 minutes, there was no less than 100 cars that went past on this road that were honking for the Trump supporters. And I only counted maybe 10 or 15 that were honking their horn for Biden. Now, those aren't votes, but that indicates engagement. That indicates people actually paying attention, people would get out and vote. If you're going to sit there in traffic and then lay on your horn to support a bunch of schmucks sitting on the side of the road waving a flag, I mean, you're probably going to wind up going to vote. You're probably going to vote for the guy that they want you to vote for. Sure. So you're looking at a lot of engagement for Trump coming into this election, specifically in Florida, which is not something that you're going to hear a lot about. You're going to hear a lot about the guys at this thing called the Lincoln Project. You're going to hear about Republicans who regret voting for Trump. And they exist. All right, I'm related to a couple of them. They exist. Those people are around, but they, I feel, from what I have seen and the people I've talked to, they are in the minority when it comes to the Republican side. Whereas got a bunch of people who are dragging themselves to the polls to vote for Biden because they hate Trump. Hate's not a good motivator. Hate's a good thing to get you to sit on your couch and then scowl at the TV. In wanting to vote for somebody gets you out to vote.
Exactly.
Or fear, which is really where the question comes. How many Democrats are not just angry with Trump? How many independents are not just angry with Trump, but are actually afraid of if he continues? I don't think that's all that many of them. There's a few that are going to be, and they're running out in the streets, typically with the BLM and the Antifa crowd. Now, I think it's quite obvious they're scared. They're scared of a Trump presidency. I get it. I just think they're wrong.
Very wrong. Right.
They're just wrong. So, I'm pretty certain Trump's going to get Florida.
Yeah.
Arizona, I don't even know why we're talking about Arizona.
It feels bad. Feels bad to have to talk about Arizona. Yeah, it feels really bad having to talk about Arizona. It's traditionally been red. It's looked good.
Yep.
But yeah, it's been kind of this toss-up, especially back in 2015 and this time. It again, like Florida, it's still looking that way. It's a toss-up. It could be pretty close. But at the same time, some of the more reputable pollsters out there are kind of nudging that edge for Trump. A lot of folks I'm tracking sort of early vote registration and Republican Party registration, new Republican Party registrations for this election. That was actually a big deal in this state, too.
Yeah.
It was a huge deal in this state, actually. It made up a lot of ground.
For the last 5 years, actually, Republicans have been growing their party faster than the Democrats have. Now, incidentally, the people who are registered as independents have grown faster than both parties, than either party. But when you compare Republicans to Democrats, you're getting more Republicans into the state than you are Democrats. Typically, my understanding is independents tend to follow that same breakdown on where they lean. So it's a fairly safe bet to make that Republicans have a stronger position running into this election in Florida. But we were talking about Arizona.
So yeah, like I said, with the data I've been looking at, Arizona overall looking a bit better for Trump. A lot of these races are going to come down to kind of where independents go and where independents end up. And what we were just saying with the angry voter versus the person who wants to go out for their guy, it's going to come down to a lot of that too. Is the hatred against Trump going to be enough to pull out enough of those?
And the fear.
Right, yeah. Are those negatives going to be enough to pull people out to vote versus Trump's strategy, which generally is more positive, pulling people out with accomplishment? That doesn't mean he doesn't use the other things, but I think much of his message is about separating himself from...
And we're gonna touch on this later, but that goes back to the last debate.
Yeah.
The last debate, you had doom and gloom Biden, and you had it's morning in America again, Trump.
Yes.
Yes, that was Reagan who used that first, but Trump was really trying to take the same line.
Sure.
He ain't no Reagan. But he was trying to take the same line. And now, the reason I mentioned fear again on the side of the Democrats is first election, Trump used fear. Trump used fear of Hillary. Trump used fear of losing the Supreme Court, and that was effective. It was exceedingly effective. It got me out to vote. Right, I didn't like him first time around. You remember that. We were talking about that 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I was very concerned about a Trump presidency. I have been very, very pleased with the fact that I was wrong on so much when it came to that. But
Me too.
But fear can be effective. So the question is Trump's positivity going to outweigh people being afraid of Trump continuing to be president? Now, the reason that for those of you who may not pay attention historically to what happens with some of these states, the reason we talk about Arizona, like why are we even have to talk about this, is Arizona is traditionally exceedingly Republican. They are honestly some of the most... They don't trust the federal government. They don't trust their own government. They don't trust any of their government. They have that part of their state personality in spades. And so to even think of Arizona going with big daddy government Democrats, it's like telling me a Baptist priest is going out for a slammer at the bar. I'm very confused, and there's something screwbally going on here.
Sure.
So Arizona is typically very Republican. It does appear to be a bit of a toss-up, but the pollsters that we've been looking at, the less ideological ones, or even just the ones, because there are a few that we look at that are actually pretty ideologically right-wing. They lean right. That's just what they are, but they specifically are seeking out those shy Trump voters. Those Trump voters that don't want to say anything. Trump voters that don't trust allowing people to know their vote.
Right.
And if I can't recall where I saw it, but there was a poll that I saw that showed, this may have been People's Pundit, actually, that showed that it was that Arizona had the highest concern about sharing their vote. They had the largest number of people who were worried about letting other people know who they voted for. So it stands to reason you're going to get a lot of shy Trump voters in Arizona. And it looks like he's probably going to take Arizona. I'm very confident that Arizona is going to remain red time around.
As well, quick note about Arizona, and I believe it was a People's Pundit crosstab. Some of the data. One of the great things about some of these pollsters we're looking at, they actually release their data. Go look at the data and how they weighted it, and like what they do. They don't give you every bit of all their information because some of it's kind of trade secrets about how they're conducting that stuff, and they don't want other people to do it. They want other people to have to do that work.
We'll be putting a link to their polling in the description down below. So if you want to go check that out for yourself, please do. It is, and if you want to give to them, absolutely do. They are crowdfunding these polls. So there is a way to donate to them if you feel so led. Please do so. I want more data from them. I really do.
Please, more. It's so good.
He gets high off of numbers. Wants the data.
It's so good.
So, anyways, yeah, Arizona looking like it's going to be pretty Republican by the end of the day. I think next on our list, Ohio.
Yeah, so I put Ohio in here because Ohio is, I think, been something that can go back and forth. We're always looking at elections, like what are they going to do? Because it's a big state, it gives a good number of votes, and you got to win Ohio. Everybody's always saying you got to win Ohio.
Do you know why that is, though?
Please enlighten.
Historically, Ohio always, not always, but almost always goes with votes for the eventual winner of the electoral college.
So there's a correlation between
very strong
actually
correlation.
Winning.
A very strong correlation. Florida has gathered that as it's become a bigger and bigger swing state, but Ohio, even though it's a significant state, but it is not one of the top four. It's not one of the big dog states. New Texas, Florida, California. But it is a state that is consistently a microcosm of the country. It typically will vote for the eventual winner. So a lot of people look to Ohio, and Ohio is considered a canary in the coal mine, a bellwether state. That if you win Ohio, you're likely going to win the whole shebang.
Oh, sure.
And the Ohio polls are actually looking pretty darn good for Trump.
Yeah.
Whereas some of his old wins, like in Wisconsin, Minnesota, some of the other pollsters are saying, no, he's got no chance there. Ohio is, most are considering it pretty close to a toss-up, and a lot of the people that we were looking at are saying that it's probably going to go red, which is a great thing for Republicans and a great thing for Trump. It's like Cleveland's good for something. Don't tell Alex I said that.
He's always making fun. It's okay.
Anyway, so Ohio, we can pretty much move past that pretty quickly. I mentioned Barris earlier.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy running the People's Pundit Daily poll that I mentioned earlier. That they have the crowdfunded polls. They did do a poll in Ohio, and it's looking like it's pulling towards Trump.
So it looks good as far as we could tell. Looks like Trump's going to come out on that one. Got next Georgia. So Georgia's one. I mean, Georgia's traditionally pretty red, as far as I've seen. Georgia's red, solid red. It's going to be red, right? But
at least since the 80s.
Right. When some of these polls from the media touted polls from any side, by the way, Fox News, CNN, any of these folks, from what I've seen, polling from there, I honestly just looked at it like, oh, it's just skewed and skewed just like a lot of these other places. You know, they're calling some big thing. They're doing their normal negative media thing.
It's Atlanta and Savannah.
Why at this point more of a toss-up than... Because we've been talking about this and saying, well, you got to look at Georgia this time.
Really? I don't know what's going on in Georgia. Y'all stuck something in the peaches. I'm not sure what's going on with you guys. I do know that Atlanta tends to be more blue, and Savannah tends to do the same thing. So just like any state, their metro areas, they tend to run Democrat and run towards the left side of the aisle. What's happening there right now? I'm not sure. Perhaps it has to do with activities and stuff surrounding BLM, bad shoots by cops, may have activated a previously untapped group of voters. I don't know much specifically about what's going on with Georgia. All I know is that even traditionally conservative pollsters aren't confident about Georgia, and that says far more than CNN or MSNBC's news polls saying that, oh, Georgia might be in play. You hear that, it's like, yeah, sure, Bo Peep, tell me more about the wolf that's coming after your sheep. But when you hear Fox News, Rasmussen, and some really conservative pollsters that are local saying that Georgia might swing blue, you got to sit up and take note. One pollster does not a prediction make. However, when all of them, irrespective of ideology, are saying that a traditionally red state may be a blue state this time around, you gotta listen. You gotta take note. And so Georgia's a mystery for me. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, no, me too. It definitely is a mystery for me as well. And it's hard to say. I'm hoping some of that is going to be polling anomalies. I'm hoping there's just something there where...
A lot of anomalies.
I know.
That's a lot of anomalies.
I'm hoping that's the case, but right, that seems like too much to hope for. It sounds like it's going to be closer than we really like.
It's a screecher. It's going to be a screecher. If it's not, I'll buy you a drink.
I'll take it.
North Carolina. North Carolina is another one, but that's a little bit less surprising. North Carolina has been kind of going the route of Virginia in a lot of ways demographically. Their metro areas, they've been getting a lot of people moving into the city. You wind up typically with Democrats in those cities, and people don't necessarily change politics when they move to a new place, but certain places tend to draw people from the same politics. So you've got a growing population in North Carolina, just like you've had a growing population in Virginia the past several decades. And now it's starting to tend a little bit more blue, become a battleground state, whereas when we were kids, North Carolina was red as blood.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
And Virginia has voted for Obama twice, heavily for Obama, actually, compared to what you would expect. And then you look at their state legislature, their governor, it's very clear Virginia is becoming, or has become, a very blue state. The same forces seem to be occurring in North Carolina. Now, a lot of the polls that we've been looking at more recently have been showing that there may be, and seems to indicate that there is a shy Trump voter base that is going to pull it out in North Carolina. Trafalgar definitely feels confident in that, or as confident as you can be in a toss-up. It's like, what, 34%?
It's very close.
For Trump.
You're also considering margin of error easily.
Which, again, all of these states are in the margin of error.
Yes.
They're all in the margin of error. That's why they're battleground states. So when we say, it's probably going to be this, it's probably going to be that, that's what we're leaning towards, but the margin of error still leaves it that it could go the other way.
Right.
And so Rasmussen's has it even closer. Quinnipiac and some other more centrist pollsters definitely have it as leaning Democrat, which is why you're going to see on election night a lot of major news outlets talking about North Carolina like it probably is going to go blue. I don't think it is. It seems to be trending more red because that's the more recent polls from the folks that we were just talking about seem to be indicating a growing comfortability with saying I'm voting Trump.
Another one of the things that's actually been a big indicator for me this time around that I think ended up being one last time as well has to do with as you get closer to the election. As you get closer to the election and the polls are coming out, you can sort of see some trends. What I've noticed, you can see trends in like there's like a directionality to the way things are going usually. And that was actually one of the big things in retrospect. It wasn't something I saw back in 2016 and thought, oh, look at that. I mean, it was interesting, but I didn't know as much. I wasn't even as interested in all the data around politics for 2016. We can get into that later.
Got it. So you just jumped into these numbers right when the numbers stopped making sense.
It's what got me into it. The fact that they didn't make sense and everybody was so wrong, the anomalies are what draw me to the data more than. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So, looking at those trends in 2016 later, things just sort of started looking like, oh, Trump's pulling up or Trump's pulling ahead. And what I'm noticing in a lot of these places that we're talking about now is that same sort of trend. Is that same sort of trend. So that's why I have a little bit more of a confidence level in some of these from some of the more respected pollsters, because you're seeing stuff from end of September and this month, and you're seeing like this progression where it was not as tight or it was tight but not as tight, and then you're seeing it tighten to neck and neck or Trump pulling ahead, and that to me showing again this weird trend that it may not always be an indicator, but last time I saw that happen it should have been an indicator.
Well, Pennsylvania is another good example of that.
Pennsylvania's a great one.
They were back in 2016. They said Pennsylvania was gonna go for Hillary.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert! It did.
It didn't. No,
it did. That's not how that worked. No. You wound up with a very red Pennsylvania, which I did not expect. I saw that election night, and I just jumped out of my chair, and I said, "What's happening? What?" So yeah, no, but Pennsylvania is showing those same trends. They're now a dead heat, according to Barris at the People's Pundit Daily.
Sure.
We have Trafalgar and Rasmussen have it pretty close to a dead heat at this point, within 1% either side. Pennsylvania, you're in for a ride.
Yeah.
Oh, and even more of a ride because your state is so Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not going to be counting their early votes or their absentee votes until the day of the election. In Florida, we started doing that on the 12th.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we got called out back in 2000, and
badly.
We're not doing that again. We're
so
pretty solid now.
So Florida man's got other business to deal with other than the election,
like gators.
It's good. Anyways, Pennsylvania, they're not counting. They're actually not going to be counting their votes, their early votes or their absentee votes or whatever they call them, the mail-in vote. They're not counting those until the day of the election. They have not started counting them. They just have them sitting in buckets, waiting to be counted. So, don't expect to hear anything definitive from Pennsylvania unless the pollsters that we're talking about were very, very wrong.
Right. I mean, one thing...
Or far less right than they should be.
Maybe. One thing is a couple things I think are going to depend on that. So, for instance, the number of actual voters that come out on day of versus the mail-ins. I know.
Oh, it's always about turnout.
Yeah. Well, as far in terms of when we'll know about Pennsylvania, one of the big things, and I'd have to double check the numbers on this. I haven't had time to get to Pennsylvania. I barely had time to get through Florida looking at stuff. Still need to go back and look at that data. For Pennsylvania, some of it's going to depend on just how many mail-in ballots there were and early votes there were versus the total number they're going to get. And it's going to be worse than it's ever been because early voting turnout, whether it's mail-in or not, it's way up. It's way up everywhere.
Yeah.
It's super up. It's huge. It's huge here. I mean, I think over 60% electorate in Florida's already done. And that's true in a lot of states.
Well, and that's actually the big concern on the part of Republicans. Traditionally, when Democrats say we win when we get the people out to vote, that's not hyperbole. That's true. That's very true. There are just that many more Democrats in most of the big states, including Florida. We actually, in this state, we have more Democrats registered than have Republicans, and yet we still have a Republican governor, a supermajority Republican Senate, and a supermajority Republican House. So with the House and the Senate, it's gerrymandering. With the governor, have a bunch of independents that like Republicans. At the end of the day, when Democrats get out and vote en masse in just huge numbers, and this is the year for it, statistically. This is the year for it. Their party does not have the presidency. It is, you have an incumbent Republican. This is the year that you can expect to have huge amounts of Democrats getting out and voting. When they do that and vote Democrat, typically you wind up with a Democrat winning, which is why these tightening polls in some of these battleground states, especially typical states that typically go Democrat, Pennsylvania, why this looks so interesting.
It's very
so exciting.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty wild.
But what I was saying about Pennsylvania before, because I want to wrap this up with them, because we got a couple of other states to get to, which they're going to be fairly easy to move through after this.
I think so.
But Pennsylvania, I'm not expecting us to know anything that night. I would be surprised if we heard anything about them by the end of the week.
It could be that bad.
Especially if it's close and you start having people call for recounts. Guarantee you, both of these campaigns have lawyers in all of the states that we've currently mentioned and more preparing to challenge the vote. That's not just Trump people. Even Biden is going to challenge the vote.
Sure.
Hillary Clinton actually told Biden, not necessarily directly and personally, but she told him in a public address, he should not concede the election under any circumstances. And what she means by that is what Trump means by that when he says that he's not going to concede the election. If they think the vote is screwbally, they're going to sue.
Exactly.
It's not that he's not going to leave the White House. It means he's just going to sue to see what happens. Al Gore did this in 2000. He did this in 2000. This is what this was actually the whole thing with the hanging chads here in Florida.
Yes.
We had a contested election. The guy who was declared the loser didn't concede the election and sued to have more recounts done, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. If it's that close again, that'll happen here.
Yep.
We're not going to have like some grand civil war
No.
kick off over that.
There isn't like a cadre of generals stumping for either person, sitting on the sidelines waiting to bring their people in. Like,
This isn't Egypt. That's what happened during the Arab Spring. That's what happened with them. This is not Egypt, people. We have
tradition.
We have systems. We have systems in place. They will follow those systems. That's not the concern. So y'all can calm down. If you were at all messed up with that, you can calm down. So Pennsylvania, not expecting to hear from them for several days. Not officially. You're going to hear a lot of people saying, "No, we won this one. We won that one." You'll probably have them both declare victory in Pennsylvania. We won't officially know until the Pennsylvania supervisor. I know in Florida it goes up to the State Department, but I don't know. Whatever they call it in Pennsylvania, they will come out with that official count sometime in the coming days. It will not be election night. It won't be the day after. Next on our list here, another state that really shouldn't even be on the list for potential Republican states. But can we hear Michigan 2.0?
Yes, please. So Michigan is actually one of my favorite ones to look at this time, partially because it's just a toss-up and it shouldn't be. It's traditionally heavily Democrat.
It's heavily Union is actually the big deal.
Yes. Michigan's looking so interesting, and looking back at polls, looking at the media polls versus the more independent polls. Media polls are still looking at Michigan. They're still looking at Michigan and going, oh, D+8. At one point, they were saying D+12. There's no way. There's no way that's done. That is so skewed. Looking at a lot more of the independent stuff, it's either neck and neck, a little bit in Biden, again, like a lot of these, or a little bit Trump. And what I've seen more from people like Trafalgar is a little Trump, and some people like Barris, a little more Biden. It looks close. It looks close. It's hard to say. In 2016, he took it, which was a shock. It was surprising. It put him up with a big edge. He was over 300 electoral votes in 2016.
I actually don't remember what Trump's final count was.
I think it was huge.
It was certainly significant.
Yeah, and it was because he took some outlier states that you wouldn't have expected, like Michigan.
Yeah, and Wisconsin.
Right.
I don't see that happening. You're far more confident than I am. But
well, you never know. We'll talk about it in a sec. With Michigan, like you said, big union state, and unions seem to be one of these groups that.
Unions are traditionally Democrats. It goes back to the New Deal with FDR, and even prior to that, they were pro-worker, whereas the Republicans, going all the way back to the turn of the century, with Teddy Roosevelt being the strange one, they were pro-business. They were pro-big business, and now Michigan, being a big union state, has always been very Democrat. They wanted to have another shot. They wanted to see, after having 80 years of just dealing with nothing but Democrat rule, they said, you know what? Let's see what happens if we start voting Republican. And they did well. All right, they did not make out bad in Trump's America. And if you look at some of the things that Biden has said regarding the Green New Deal, energy, all of these other more left-wing policy areas, you've got, it's not good for most of these old industry unions.
No.
It's certainly not good for Michigan, car industry and everything. No. They're already smarting from that, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we rework our economy? What do we replace it with? Struggling with that for 30 years at this point or more. There. And the deal that they're having to come up with is, how do we go with the guys that we've almost never voted for, with the exception of 20? Or do we go with the people that we've always gone with, the Democrats, who are saying, we're going to make it harder for you to get a job by completely cutting out the area of the energy sector and the economy that they operate in.
Yep. Operate in and absolutely require. All that big heavy industry. You can't run that stuff easily off of like green energy, especially when the green energy can't even be done in your.
Now a lot of these renewables, they are doing a whole lot better. I looked at these recently, and if you like what you're seeing, pop back for another podcast. We're probably going to be talking about that.
Love to go through that.
But I've looked at some of the new energy stuff, and like wind, solar, it's become a hell of a lot more efficient.
Sure.
So much more efficient, actually usable. It's very difficult for Michigan to use solar. The wind, sure, you've got the lakes, but what are you going to do? You're going to build a bunch of windmills out on the lake and then have everybody, and then just have, well, that becomes a problem for fishing, because there is fishing that occurs on those lakes out of Michigan and out of Illinois and Wisconsin and all the states that are around the Great Lakes. That's a problem if they start doing that. Not to take the environmentalist line, however, at the end of the day, Papa's got to go make some money, even if it's going out and fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And if all the fish die or all the fish are displaced because of all of this mass construction, what do? So they're between a rock and a hard place, and nobody wants to say the N-word, nuclear. I'm serious.
I know.
About nuclear.
I've seen very few.
Nuclear would probably be in my opinion, would be good for Michigan. But anyways, Michigan.
I think you've covered Michigan pretty well, by the way. I don't have much to add. You hit all the points there. I think he has a good chance there. I think good chance.
I think he's got a decent chance in Michigan. I think it's going to be a screecher. I don't think that it's going to be an early night in Michigan. It's going to be a very late night in Michigan. But if it's an early night, probably going to go for Biden. If it's a late night, expect Trump. I think that Trump's going to get them because, well, everything that I just mentioned. The Democrats are not in the interests of the people of Michigan. Not anymore. They were at one point, and they were for a very long time. That world doesn't exist anymore. We have a different Republican Party that is pro-worker. We have a Republican Party that is pro-assistance for lower income, and it's still pro-business. It wants business to do well, but it's playing all those sides now. Whereas now you've got a Democrat Party that is still anti-business. They are also now, for whatever reason, good idea, becoming anti-worker, or at least anti-traditional worker, which is what Michigan is.
Yeah.
So, members of the union in Michigan, look to your members, ask them who's going to be good for us. And the fact of the matter is, that ain't the Democrats anymore, buddies. Get with the program. Times have changed.
And I think there's an element of protectionism there, too, that is helpful when it comes to unions and the jobs here in the United States.
Protectionism really isn't something that's typically Republican.
Right.
But it used to be typically Democrat. It's not typically either of them anymore. But the Republicans are starting to trend more towards protectionism.
And that's what I mean. More of just the actions from 2016 to now.
You'll never hear me say that protectionism is efficient for an economy.
No.
It's not. However, it is beneficial for certain sectors. It can be beneficial for certain sectors of the economy. It'll allow them to survive, and there are some that are required strategic. That's a different conversation, and I've already digressed once.
More specifically, I only bring it up in the context of Michigan. It can make a big difference there, especially when you're going after China regarding steel and that
is an economic Cold War in spades. Do not look at the trade war as anything less than a Cold War with China. With Russia, we dealt in nukes. With China, we're dealing in businesses. It's the same power play. It's just using a different method.
The only thing I'd add to that digression is I think China's on the extraordinary losing that because they don't have the leverage from a trade perspective.
Not at the moment, and we've been doing very well with that. Again, thank you, Mr. Trump. Somebody who actually, for better or worse, decided to take this fight to them now. And I think it's for the better.
I think it's for the better.
So, Michigan, vote Republican. It's in your interests. And I can't believe that I'm actually sitting here and being able to say that Michigan should be voting Republican.
Very happy about it, though.
Happy. Confused.
Very.
Next up on the list is Wisconsin.
Yeah, so Wisconsin was one of these last time that was also it was forecast to go to Clinton. It did not go to Clinton. It went to Trump. This time around, it's still a toss-up, but it's looking more like a Biden play. And from the raw data, even I will admit, like from a pure raw data perspective, I think it does look more Biden. You know, you got Trafalgar calling it. You got People's Pundit. You got these folks. Even these folks are calling more in favor of Biden for Wisconsin. So from a pure data perspective, I think Wisconsin also probably Biden. And I have my own slight prediction that it's not going to end up that way, but it's more intuition, which may be very shaky.
I'll give you one little bit about Wisconsin.
I'll take any bit you want to give.
After the stuff that happened in Kenosha, I can see reason. For there to be a lot of shy Trump voters. Crazy stuff happened in Kenosha. I can see why somebody would not want to admit that they were voting for Trump in that state after all of that. I can see why, and not because they're ashamed of Trump, far from it, but recognizing you got some hoodlums, you got some craziness going on, you don't know who's going to try to pop you in the mouth. So you clam up. So I can see why that would be the case. It doesn't seem like it's going, like it's enough to cover the shortfall.
The other thing that was making me more interested in Wisconsin and potentially pushing it Trump, although again, I can say it 100 times, really could go either way. It's just a little bit of a feeling. Is that pollsters were saying, while going over some of this data, that Wisconsin is not an easy place to poll. It's a very difficult place to get 100% accurate stuff out of, because you have a lot of just very decent, quaint people that don't want to get into. They just don't want to get in. And so what happens is a lot of times you get people just aren't going to talk to you. They don't talk to you. They hang up, which may sound rude, but they'll do that over getting into the politics. The politics are much more of a impolite point than hanging up on you.
So they're hobbits that need a Frodo.
Kind of.
Got it.
So
very polite people, minding their own business. That's fair.
And here's another piece as to why I think Wisconsin could be, again, data is showing Wisconsin for Biden. I want to make that very clear. It really is. Margin of error with shy Trump voter, with all the things that make all this so murky. Still looking Biden. One of the reasons I'm looking at Wisconsin with an interested eye, going, maybe it's the stuff you're talking about with Kenosha. It's really hard to poll them and get a sense. And in the age of the shy Trump voter, I think it's going to skew a little more to him. And the other piece of it is Trump has been using a smart thing of persuasion regarding recency, where our information cycles are so quick, right? A few days is all you get. Maybe a week if you're lucky, right? It's got to be big. And he, especially at his rallies, one thing he showed at his rallies with like a giant jumbotron, hitting this Hunter Biden thing hard. They brought it out late, probably on purpose.
Of course it was on purpose.
It was on purpose. It's kind of like the 2016 Clinton stuff that came out with the emails. They were pushing it hard. Now Comey came out with that last bit, and it just crushed. And this was an area where it crushed in, because this is a big issue for them. People, same with Michigan, and even same in parts of Minnesota. People have issues with the government being corrupt, issues with the government like screwing them over and making their own money and doing stuff, while these guys are working their butt off, doing what they're doing. It's a big issue for them. And so it's very possible that they're hard to poll. It's so close, but it's really going to come out for them because they're not putting up with it. stuff. I don't know. That's what's, I think, pushing my intuition. Fortunately, quantitative. That's what makes it like it happen.
Yeah. It's actually my opinion on Wisconsin's about the same. Minnesota, just even stronger.
Fair enough.
Minnesota's very
stronger actually.
Very Democrat, and it's not likely to. I don't think it's likely to be Republican. It's likely to stay. It's likely to stay Democrat, and I think it's probably going to be an early night. It's going to be closer than the Democrats would like it to be, but it's probably going to be.
So there are a couple metrics that make Minnesota interesting for me. 2016 was a close election for him. Actually, he actually almost won Minnesota. It actually almost happened. So again, the history may not be it. There's 4 years has been wild. We've had a lot of stuff happen, right? But at the same time, if we consider history, if it can be at all a valid data point, I think there might be something there. Who knows? Between the history that he almost won it, between some of the jobs coming back to Minnesota from economic developments with a little bit of protectionism, allowed them to not have to compete globally, and between some of the more radical stuff that's happened in capital, plus in areas outside of that capital, with BLM and riots and Antifa, that kind of thing. I think there's going to be, look, I've seen a lot of video on the ground from Minnesota, or excuse me, specifically in Minneapolis.
It looks bad.
It looks bad. It looks like a war zone. It doesn't look like an American city at all.
That's true. It's unfortunate, but true. We'll see what happens in Minnesota. Maybe they're even shyer there.
Maybe. No, I would call it now.
Or more shy.
You'd have every reason to be shyer there. Like, if you're in Minneapolis, how in the world are you going to come out and say you're voting for Trump? Somebody calls you on the phone asking, there's no reason not to be paranoid about these things because people are losing their jobs over talking about their political affiliation in this age. So they're losing their jobs. They're getting mobs outside their houses. People are throwing Molotov cocktails. Mm-hmm. So the shy Trump voter could be a serious thing in Minnesota. And with all the other metrics, those other qualitative things, not quantitative things. And I have an intuition it's possible. But more than Wisconsin, I think, actually, for Biden.
Now, Iowa's another state that I can't believe we're talking about.
Oh, I love it. I get excited.
Now, there are some reasons why I shouldn't be surprised. Iowa did go way more for Bernie than any other Democrat. Twice. Iowa's Bernie territory for some reason. I think it's probably the capital. But I don't believe Iowa's going to go blue. They say it's a toss-up. I don't believe it. The data that we've seen on it show that it tends red, shows that it's continuing to trend red. I don't see Iowa turning blue. If it does, well, again, I owe you another drink.
I'd be pretty shocked. If Iowa hits blue.
So, Iowa's going to be red. Very confident on it. And, yeah, that's that.
Not much to go on with Iowa. It's just interesting because it's one of these other chaos elements that something is just changing and it's like, it happened.
Well, there is something. I have heard stories about how Iowa farmers have actually gotten the short end of the stick with our trade Cold War with China.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And a lot of them haven't liked it. Trump tried to fix the problem by sending money their way, sending relief their way. Not sure how effective that was. But there are reasons for them to not like Trump, but honestly, there's even less reasons for them to like Biden. A lot of the same reasons that Iowans should be skeptical of actually voting for any Democrat at this point are the same reasons that Michiganites should be skeptical of doing that.
Yeah.
They may not be a union state, but think about this. what's going to happen to all of those farms when the Green New Deal rolls around? Trust me, your farming ain't good for that local environment.
Nope.
You have to do, and you guys know this, you guys have to do a lot of things to make sure that the soil doesn't become a dust bowl, that you take care of the land so that you can work it and then leave it to your families. Democrats ain't going to care that you're doing all those nice things. With the Green New Deal, that's going to become problematic. You're going to have a harder time doing the work that you've done, your grandfather has done, and your great-grandfather has done. This is a thing you need to consider. Is my rough time right now going to be made worse by voting for the other guy? In this case, the other guy being Biden, I think you will. It's very likely based on those policies alone, and anything adjacent to the Green New Deal is going to be problematic for farmers, far more so than Trump's trade war. And besides, the new free trade agreement that we have with Canada and Mexico, USMCA, that actually should help you guys out going forward. Should help Iowans out a lot going forward, because it's going to allow them to trade more on an level with the Canadians and with the Mexicans. It was a travesty of the North American Free Trade Agreement that it made it more difficult for us going down there, and made more difficult for us being able to sell products here in the States that didn't come from overseas or from across the border. Over just outside. And our last one, Nevada. Nevada's weird.
Nevada's very weird. Looking at
it is because of Vegas, but not because Vegas is Vegas.
Nevada has been interesting because there's been a lot of chatter about Nevada going to go red. Is Nevada going to go red? Is it possible?
It does sometimes.
It's technically possible even this time that it could. It's not impossible. It's within the kind of margins we've been talking about, technically speaking, which again makes it interesting. Had to peg something. I think we're in agreement on this. It's probably going to go blue.
That's what it seems. Most of the polls, including the ones that we tend to look at more closely, because they wait for the shy Trump voters. They don't shy away from them, as it were. Even these polls. Did Trafalgar have a Nevada poll?
They did. I think they put Biden ahead on that.
Yeah, it's even the more right-wing polls are saying it's probably going to go Biden, and that makes sense. Nevada's has a fairly big city in Las Vegas. Then there's Reno. You've got a lot of small business guys. You've got a lot of big business guys. And you've got a lot of people who are living in these cities and working in the service industry, for lack of a better term. These are the kinds of people that tend to end up voting Democrat. Fact. So it's not surprising when Nevada... The thing about Nevada is it's also very few electoral votes, but in a close race, it can make the difference. In the maps that we've been looking at, definitely one I've been looking at, whether Nevada goes red or blue is actually rather inconsequential. Yep. We want you, Nevada. We want you.
We want you.
But we're not expecting it, and it's really probably not going to make that big of a deal, actually. It was everybody else that we were talking about.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, basically every other state that we were talking about was actually kind of a key in a chain toward victory, key in their path. Just to sum all that up, Florida, Arizona, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, all that stuff. Actually, before Pennsylvania, all those things before are going to be really key to see what in the end are going to be the deciding factors in terms of who's going to absolutely need what set of what. So, for instance, in some of my projections with what I've been looking at, if you go through Florida, Arizona, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, and you trump those, right? You hit those red. If you run all those, and then you game through the Rust Belt, and you game through these remaining states, and also Iowa, Iowa Trump. At that point, you get to a section where it doesn't matter what you look at with Nevada. If at that point, Biden basically needs to win all of those 4 big Rust Belt states. There's no option. He has to win literally every single one.
Including Pennsylvania.
Yes. I know, especially Pennsylvania. If he loses Pennsylvania in that slug, he immediately loses. Like, there's no recovery.
Oh, he immediately loses?
Yeah, there's no win at all. Same with Michigan. But the only way he doesn't immediately lose, although he still loses, is if he takes the other states, which are Wisconsin and Minnesota. But that goes into that really weird, interesting thing that we were gaming out a little bit in ties.
That made me nervous when we were talking about ties.
I don't know if
because with the states that were up, it's technically possible that this could go down to a tie, where you have 269 on one hand, 269 on the other hand, and then we get to see something that hasn't happened since the early 1800s. The House of Representatives gets to choose. Guess what? Trump still wins. Believe it or not.
Yeah, and that might sound weird. Like, wait, how is the House going to get Trump in? You got the squad, you got all these people.
It's majority Democrat.
Well, right.
The House, by the way, is likely to remain majority Democrat. So, in the event of a tie, the election goes to the House, and the House of Representatives vote among themselves who becomes president. Now, each state gets 1 vote. There are more states with Republican-dominated delegations in the House than there are Democrat states that have that dominate their delegation in the House. So, and each state votes as a block. So, what you'd wind up with is Trump after likely losing the popular vote.
Yep.
Not getting enough electoral votes, and with a Democrat-dominated House being elected by the Republican minority without any Democrat support. That's not the system being broken. That's the system working as intended. But most people, understandably, they're not going to see it that way. And that actually that puts a cold pit in my stomach. That scares me. Because then what happens? You wind up with the Electoral College being attacked even more from the left and going even more mainstream. You wind up with people questioning the entire Constitution, or at least that part of the presidential election, and the whole point of our election being the way that it is now, with the Electoral College and people not having the popular vote for the president, is to make as certain as possible that the president who is elected is he has the broadest issue set. He has the most broad appeal to the states, because each state's going to have their own individual issue, own individual interests. And the founders wanted to have us have a president that would speak to the most states, not just the most people. Because if they had done it that way the first time, it would have been a country of New York and Virginia. When we first became a country, it would have just been a country that was just of New York and Virginia and a bunch of people in a sidecar. That's not what they wanted. They wanted it so that you would have these states, these smaller states, would have a voice, and there would be a reason for the president to actually care about them. If we were to lose the system that we currently have with that, we'd have the same problem.
Yep.
We'd have a country that was dominated by mostly California, Texas, Florida, New York, but not even just those states. It would be dominated by cities in those states.
Yes.
you'd wind up with San Francisco, New York City, Miami, Austin, Chicago, and Illinois being the dominant constituencies in the country.
Right.
The rest of us be chopped liver or something like that.
Basically, big city issues.
So,
if you're a farmer in some place, or you're like a miner,
right,
or you're a manufacturing worker.
However, that scenario actually requires for Maine to actually have one red vote. It doesn't look like that's going to happen with Maine. Maine's probably going to be solid blue. Maine and Nebraska, they have a funky way of doing things. They'll split their votes. No other state does that. But Nebraska's probably going to have one blue vote, and Maine's probably going to be straight blue, so we don't need to worry about a tie.
Right.
But my ultimate prediction is Biden is going to have 244 electoral votes, and Trump's going to have 294. It's going to feel a lot closer than that actually sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're probably not going to hear about it for at least a week and a half.
Yeah, and in terms of where the electoral map's going to be, I think it's either going to come out close electorally with a Trump win, where he's sort of eking out, what would that be? I think it's 274 or 279, which puts Biden at 50s or 60s. I mean, really close. Right. Literally a state or two different. Some of these big states are too different. Or he's going to kill it. He's going to end up over 300. Mm-hmm. Again, like he did with Clinton. Probably 305 plus. Because he could take a few more of these Rust Belt states than any media poll who's saying D plus 12.
As I said at the beginning of our conversation, this is anybody's game.
It really is. It really is.
Thank you for joining us for our pre-election analysis. Again, this was our first podcast. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You made it to the end of the first one. Thank you very much. We are going to be doing more of these going forward. It's going to be stuff with regards to current events, politics, new policies that come up. Please tune in. If you like what you saw, again, like, share, subscribe, all of the good stuff. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. It is evening here, actually.
Yeah.
But we got a break for dinner. So thank you very much, and you guys have a wonderful time.
Take care.